Okay, so good afternoon, class. We are now on our 10th week for synchronous discussion for ALIAC 2 Principles of Aviation. Our topic today is about atmosphere and the rules of the air. So, first of all, let's discuss atmosphere. So, in our atmosphere, of course, this is where our aircraft will fly. So in our atmosphere, we have five layers of our atmosphere. So starting from the ground, we have first the troposphere that spans from 0 to 12 kilometers. Then we have the stratosphere, which is in a span of 12 to 50 kilometers. The mesosphere, which is 50 to 80 kilometers. Thermosphere, 80 to 700 kilometers. And what we call the exosphere, which spans from 700 to 190,000 kilometers. So, on aircrafts, especially for commercial jetliners, they typically just fly around 40,000 feet to 42,000 feet at maximum. Now, on that, ayan, si Pulgo, sorry. Pulgo. I'll just update the, I'll just update the attendance later on. I'll be checking for those who came in late. Now, going back, we have again the what we call five layers of the atmosphere, and we also have a different type of atmosphere, which is called a special type of atmospheres. But going back to commercial jetliners typically fly very low compared to the atmosphere, as our atmosphere is very thick. Um, it only flies within the troposphere. Now, within the stratosphere and mesosphere, those are already for satellites as well as for thermosphere. Okay. Now, going back, I mentioned that there are different types of layers. There's a total of five. So troposphere, it is where it is the layer nearest to the Earth. And it contains 75% or the majority of our atmosphere, of the gases of the atmosphere, as well as dust and water. This layer is the zone where weather and cloud occurs. So remember, class, the one that you're seeing, if you go outside, what is it today? Is it a rainy day? Yeah. So all those weather systems, all you see, and majority of our atmosphere really exist in the troposphere. It is much more denser. If you recall our class from 2 weeks ago, I've already explained to everyone is that whenever we go up, or the higher the altitude, the less dense the atmosphere is. So that's gonna be a trend here as we're going to discuss the different types of layers of our atmosphere. Now, this is the layer, or this is the zone where weather and cloud occurs. So remember, class, above the troposphere, there would be no weather system. Now, it is the region in which the temperature declines rapidly. So, it will hit to a point na hindi na magbabago yung ano natin, yung temperature. But then again, it's very temperature sensitive in the troposphere. So dito magano yung masyadong mainit, and then the higher you go up, the colder it is. Now air is warmer near the ground and gets colder higher up. Ayan. So always remember this one, class. But on a different side of note, or to take, please take note of this. Um, it typically is, or what happens on balloons is that how does balloon fly? How does a balloon fly? It flies through hot air, right? Because as always, hot air rises and cold air drops. But in case of an atmosphere class, it's hotter below as you go down, and it gets colder while going up. And the tropopause, this one, please take note of this class, is the level separating the troposphere and the stratosphere. So that is what we call tropopause. In some cases, this is called the ozone layer. Ayan. Now for stratosphere. So jetliners don't typically fly at this level. So it is the second layer. It starts above the stratosphere. The ozone is abundant here, and it heats the atmosphere while absorbing harmful radiation from the sun. So, later on class, dito lalabas yung the what we call ionosphere. So, ionosphere will play part here on the stratosphere later on from stratosphere to exosphere. So, just keep that in mind. Let's park that word for the meantime, the ionosphere. Now, the air here is very dry, and it is about 1,000 times thinner here than it is at sea level. So, going back to my explanation from few weeks ago, is that as you go up, air becomes thinner. Hence, it is much less denser. So if the air is much or less dense, or what will happen is that yung ano natin, yung temperature always drops because it's less denser. Ayan. Now this is where jet aircraft and weather balloons fly. So, this is for ano na to, for larger aircraft class. The reason why the aircraft flies at this range, it's not actually beyond the stratosphere. It's almost borderline troposphere and the stratosphere in which airliners typically fly. It is because you are above the weather system. As you could see, for those frequent flyers, for our students here who are frequent flyers, you could actually see if there is a storm, but instead of looking up, you just need to look down. So weather system happen on troposphere, and on stratosphere it's typically what? There's nothing in there. Air is very thin and there is no weather system around the stratosphere. And as well, it's very cold. And so if you're going to touch the windows of the aircraft, it's much colder. Now let's go through the mesosphere. Now in the mesosphere, meso came from the Greek word which means middle. And as you can see naman, legit naman siya, middle. So we have the exosphere, thermosphere, and then stratosphere and troposphere. Ah, sorry, class. So it is the third major layer, and it is the coldest, class. Medyo mag-iiba tayo dito. It's kind of different. Is that once atmosphere is gone, you are subjected to the heat of the sun. So, but in case of the mesosphere is actually the coldest, class. The coldest part of the Earth's atmosphere, with the temperature averaging about negative 90 degrees Celsius. So, sobrang lamig talaga, di ba? Compare it to, to sea level, let's say here in the Philippines, so what? It's 20 degrees Celsius, positive. Now, the temperature decreases as altitude increases, as I mentioned to you. This will happen most of throughout the discussion here in the atmosphere. And class, please take note again. It is the highest layer, yan, highest layer of the atmosphere in which the gases are all mixed up rather than being layered by their mass. It's because of as well yung gravity and yung density of air bilang sobrang baba na ng density, there's no gravity, there's less dense air, then ang nangyayari, yung pagiging compact niya is naghihiwa-hiwalay sila. Hindi sila nagsasama-sama. So that's the reason why the layer of the atmosphere here are all mixed up. Compared naman sa ano, 'di ba, na sa lower ground is that mas compact yung air. So here in the mesosphere, of course, di ka na makakahinga, wala nang air dyan. Now we have the thermosphere. Now we're here. Sa thermosphere. So, some of mga napapanood natin in movies, the aurora borealis, this one, it actually happens in the thermosphere. For a reason is that meron tayo diyang tinatawag na special kind of layer. So, that is actually the what do you call this? Yung layer natin in which nag-interact siya dun sa solar rays natin. So na-ionize yung natin, yung layer na yan, which I'll be discussing later on. Now it is the layer of the earth, layer in the Earth's atmosphere directly above the mesosphere and below the exosphere. So dito magbabago na siya. So in mesosphere class, it is the coldest region. So typically or technically dapat mas malamig yung 'di ba? It should be colder in the thermosphere but no. So the thermosphere is characterized throughout by an increase in temperature with height. So, question for the class: why do you think? So, why do you think at the start of the thermosphere, instead of the temperature still dropping, it is the point in which temperature actually rises? Why do you think, class? Anyone? Anyone from the class? Ayan. Actually, a very good answer from Mr. Galabin. So it is closer to the rays of the sun. But then again, that's still correct. But class, it is because of there's technically almost no atmosphere there. There's no more air. So what happens is that it's much more subjected dun sa araw. Diba? There's nothing protecting it. So that's why in the thermosphere, instead of the temperature still dropping, hence it's different. It's actually increasing. So the word thermos came from the Greek word which means heat. Ayan. Because instead of the atmosphere being much colder, it tends to be much more hot. Tends to be much more hotter. Now the northern lights, ayan. So the aurora or the northern lights or the aurora borealis, whichever you want to call this, is mostly occur in the thermosphere. Because in the thermosphere class, it is the part of the atmosphere in which it is very ionized. So meaning ng ionized is there are charges. So yung natin, yung sun natin emits solar rays, solar radiation to be exact, and interacts with our own atmosphere, which is what we call the ionosphere. The ionosphere is actually a special type of a layer of the atmosphere in which there is a possible communication. Communication is possible through the ionosphere. So in our department class, in avionics department, we actually utilize the ionosphere for radio communication. Now, in terms of the thermosphere naman, we could actually see the northern lights or the aurora borealis because of the interaction of the ionosphere and the solar radiation. Now, the temperature in the thermosphere is about 2,500 degrees Celsius. So, going back dun sa ano natin, going back in the mesosphere, how cold is the mesosphere class? How cold again?
Negative 90 degrees po.
Ayun. So that's actually correct. That's 100 ay sorry, 90 degrees. So that's negative 90 degrees Celsius. So instead of the thermosphere being much more hotter, the much more colder, it's different, 'di ba? It's now 2,500 degrees Celsius. So this will just keep on adding up. So it's much more hotter. Ayan. So, of course, 'di ba, every one of us has a dream to actually see this one. Class, the reason why you cannot see the aurora borealis here, it's because I'm just going to answer. Probably it's gonna be a question for later. Is that we cannot see the northern lights because we are much closer to the equator. So once we're much more closer into the equator, look at this class. Um, let's just find a much cleaner here. Let's say, of course, wala naman siguro tayo ditong flat earther, right? Nobody believes that the earth is flat. Anyone? I'm open for your for your suggestion, your belief. Just prove to me why it's flat. Anyone? I think nobody believes here that the earth is flat, right? So it's a sphere. In a sphere, you have like that. So solar radiation usually travels like that one. So what happens is that it is being deflected here. It's much more easier to see the aurora borealis on the northern and the southern hemisphere. That's the reason why you are able to see it on the upper or the northern or the southern hemisphere, not at the equator. It's because there's nothing being deflected here. We just absorb them. Compared to if you're in the northern or in the southern hemisphere. So that explains why you only see those lights on the north or in the south. Hindi dahil mas manipis ang atmosphere nila kapag nasa north ka or nasa south. No, it's not the case. It's well distributed. And so it may take in for a different type of forms. Yung aurora borealis depends on how intense the solar radiation is. Uh, Now, going back again, we're now here in the thermosphere. So, lastly is, dito tayo sa exosphere. Exosphere. Now, the exosphere is the outermost layer of the Earth's atmosphere. It starts at an altitude of about 500 kilometers and goes about 10,000 kilometers. Now, the Greek word exo means outside or external or beyond. So, it just goes far and beyond. Vast. Now, the exosphere is the uppermost layer and ito rin yung pinakamakapal or the thickest atmosphere where the atmosphere thins out and merges with the interplanetary space. Earlier what I said thickest in distance, not in density in air. Now, the gases that can be found in the exosphere are mostly hydrogen and carbon dioxide. So, there's actually no nitrogen, no other no other elements are found here at the exosphere as it's already too far away from us. So gravity is not able to hold on to nitrogen and other types of gases at this distance because it's already almost zero gravity, or technically it's zero gravity here in the exosphere. Now, what I mentioned to you earlier, class, is what we have, what we call the ionosphere. So this is a special type of atmosphere in which it is ionized or charged. Yung ano natin, yung atmosphere. It is not part, class. Don't get mixed up, as it is not part of the five layers of our atmosphere. It's just is just an atmosphere in which is it is a special kind of atmosphere that spans from the stratosphere to the exosphere. Sorry, from the mesosphere to the exosphere. Layo yan. Now, the ionosphere is defined as the layer of the Earth's atmosphere that is ionized by solar and cosmic radiation. Now, it lies from 75 to 10,000 kilometers or 46 to 621 miles above the Earth. Now, the ionosphere is part of the atmosphere that is ionized by the solar radiation. Hence, you're able to see yung mga aurora borealis. And in some cases, on aircrafts, it is utilized, or the ionosphere is actually utilized for communication. It is used for long distance communication, the ionosphere. Now, it plays an important part in the atmospheric electricity and forms the inner edge of the magnetosphere. Ayan. So, ito kasi class yung the what we call special types of atmosphere, the magnetosphere and then the ionosphere. So, yung nakikita nyo talaga na interaction is within the ionosphere and magnetosphere, yung sa aurora borealis. Ayan. Now, it is the practical importance. It has practical importance because, ayan, because among other functions, it influences radio propagation to distant places on the Earth. So as mentioned ko nga sa inyo earlier, the most critical use of the ionosphere is for communication. For pilots to be able to communicate to the traffic control or air traffic control on long distances, as hindi naman ano yan let's say there will always be a certain limitation, 'di ba class? So let's say ang ano natin, let's have an example of the internet speed, right? So let's say your internet speed at home is 10 Mbps. So you would be constrained sa, let's say, 1080p. Hindi kayo makakanood ng 4K na videos. It is because it's too slow. So same goes with the communication. So there are communication best served for short distances, and there are radio communications that is best served for long distance communication. Ayan. Now here comes the fun part. So we have the rules now. Now this is the rules that is governed by the ICAO. So we have what we call the 9 freedom of air or freedoms of air. So once you ride an aircraft, you will be subjected to different types of regulations. Now, we're now going to dive in dito sa freedom of air. So once you fly, now the 9 freedoms of air class is the freedom of air are set of commercial aviation rights. So, yan. Please take note, ha? Now, this is a set of commercial aviation rights. Just like yourself, diba? You have the right to what? Bill of Rights. Do whatever you want. Just like that. And what are the do's and don'ts? Diba? Now, in terms of this one, commercial aviation rights, granting a country's airlines the privilege to enter and land in another country's airspace. So, have you already questioned yourself why bakit si PAL merong flight dito and then si walang flight dito? There are differences in flight routes, right? So, there are cases na bakit si Philippine Airlines hindi lumilipad dito? It is because dito sa 9 freedoms of the air. They were actually formulated as a result of disagreements over the extent of aviation liberalization in the Convention on International Civil Aviation of 1944, or it is famously known as the Chicago Convention, or the tinatawag natin International Civil Aviation of 1944. So dito sa Chicago Convention, there were a lot that was agreed and disagreed upon by signatory countries. So dito nabuo class yung the 9 freedoms of the air. Now, the use of the term freedom and right confers entitlement to what? To operate international air services only within the scope, ayan, please take note of this word, within the scope of a multilateral and bilateral treaties that allow them. So, yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina. There will be do's and don'ts. You can fly here or you cannot fly here. That's why in some cases, we try to avoid flying over this type of country. It is because they don't want to. Diba? Now, the first freedom class is the right. The right to fly across its territory without flying. So one good example for this one is that, let's say you're flying from Manila. You're flying from Manila to Dubai. So you're going to fly over what? Give me the countries that you'll be flying over with. Just as a sample. You might fly over with. If you're familiar with the geographical positioning of Dubai and the Philippines, give me examples of countries, class, that you'd be flying over or might fly over. Let's say the point is just this one. So this is a RPLL or Manila. And then we have yung Dubai. What could be the countries? Ayan. So let's have a cautious na lang example. So you'd be flying over India. So that's your first freedom of air. You're allowed to fly over India without stopping. Ayan. You'd be allowed. So that's your first freedom of air. Now, the second freedom of air is iba naman. So ito yung sinasawag natin mga connecting flights. Now, the right to land in its territory for a non-traffic purposes, commonly referred to as technical stops. Ayan. So dito is, let's say there's also an emergency and it needs to stop. So that's one also part of the second freedom of air. So from point A, you could actually, pwede ka nang bumaba dun sa India for technical stops and then go to your destination. The third freedom, class, is the right to carry traffic from its state of registry to another state. So, ito naman, class, it actually involves commercial passengers na. So, if there is passengers inside, So you actually carry traffic. So you carry passengers. Now, yung sa fourth naman, our fourth freedom of air is the right to carry traffic from another state to its own state of registry. So, here comes the ano naman, the explanation class. So, home country, give me our flag carrier. Our what's the flag carrier of the Philippines? What's the airline that carries the flag of the Philippines? And PAL. So, si PAL, nagpunta siya ng LAX. What's LAX? Los Angeles. So, Los Angeles, California. So, from here, nandyan na siya, di ba? Let's say, sorry. Sa LAX. Now, the fourth freedom is you or the country, let's say yung Los Angeles or the United States of America, is actually allowing the aircraft to go back to its origin point or its home country. Being PAL, so let's say that's PAL, that's automatically situated or the home country is the Philippines. So, kasi pwedeng ano yan class, the country that you'll be landing could actually, how do you call this? Subjugate or hindi kayo paalisin. They actually have the right. So, kumbaga ho-hostagein kayo, technically. They have the power. So, eto nga, going back, that's the fourth freedom of the air in which it is the right to carry traffic from one another or from another state to its own state of registry. How do we know kung saan siya naka-register yung aircraft? We could actually see it on its wings. Ito yung mga nababasa nyo na RPC. So, the meaning of it is, ito siya, RP-C. So, let's have an example of the YS11 2252. So, there's a meaning for this one kasi class. So, that means Republic of the Philippines dash the category of the aircraft. It's a commuter aircraft. That's why it's C. So, RPC 2252. In Korea, Mr. Kim, what's the sign for the aircraft? Is it KR? Do you have an idea, Mr. Kim? What is indicated in the wings of the aircraft? What you usually see? Wala. Okay. I think it's kind of busy. Going back. For America. Anyone? Anyone has an idea? For America? Okay. Probably it's time for you to know. Just look at the sky. If there are any aircrafts flying, it's clearly visible under the wings. It's fine. Try to look at it and tell me what would it be. For America, anyone? That's NA, North America. And depends on the state. So that's why there's NAJ, NA, whatever that is. Okay, going back. We're now on the fifth freedom of the air. The fifth freedom of the air is the right to carry passenger from its home country A, deposit them at the destination B, and then pick up and carry passengers onto other international destination. Ayan. So, dito yung mga tinatawag na connecting right. Let's mute na. Okay, so going back here is dito na yung tinatawag natin connecting flight. So, yung mga kasi, HL po. Ayun. So it's actually HL for North Korea tuloy. For South Korea. So, going back here, dito papasok yung mga connecting flight. Kasi this is how business goes, class. For airlines kasi, may tinatawag tayo, there is what we call alliances or partnerships. So, aircrafts, so yung mga airliners natin, airliners tend to have partners with other airlines so that they could actually go there to that distance or to the country that they want to go to by using other airlines. So, nagsasama-sama sila. And then as well, it also helps with the capacity of the aircraft, 'di ba? That's the reason why na ginapupuno yung ano natin, yung flights natin. It's because of yung just with the fifth freedom in which we are able to carry passenger from its home country, deposit them. So let's say you're going to Dubai, you'll be stopping at let's say Thailand. So let's say the aircraft will be landing at Thailand to pick up other passengers that will be going to Dubai. And then there are also passengers that will be leaving and their origin is actually in Thailand. You get my point, class? So, kumbaga parang jeep lang siya. Diba? May papara dito, pero may sasakay pa rin. May bababa, may sasakay. That's how simple it is. So that's the fifth freedom. Now, the sixth freedom, or the sixth, is the right to carry passengers or cargo between two foreign countries, B and C, provided that the aircraft touches down in the airline's home country. Ayan. So, eto naman is, let's say, country B, LAX. And then we have Manila, MNL. And then we have Dubai, UAE. UAE. Yeah. That's UAE. Don't mind this one. Tiwala lang, UAE yan. And the aircraft is PAL. So, ang lipad niya is from LAX. So, there is actually yung the exercise of different types of freedoms. So, dito, the country will allow yung the aircraft to fly to its home origin and then from its own origin to a different country. So, kailangan lang is that they need to land dun sa home country. So, kumbaga, that's not the end flight. It's just a connecting flight for the origin or for the state registry ng aircraft na yon. Ayan. Now, the seventh freedom naman, class, is, this is quite, still easy to understand, but the right to carry on flight that originated in a foreign country, which is B, ito, bypass its home country and deposit the passenger at another international destination. Ayan. Kumbaga, it's just lumipad lang siya over the Philippines. So let's have an example. From Singapore, so let's say the aircraft is coming from Singapore and it's registered to Manila, which is RPC, let's say Palian, and then it will be flying to, let's say, Hong Kong. So what will happen is that it will just fly over sa country natin, country of registry, and then towards Hong Kong. Hindi siya maglaland. Compared dun sa sixth freedom is that kailangan magland siya dun sa home country niya. Kasi it's not allowed. So, kasi the reason for this one, class, is that all countries will be exercising the 9 freedoms of air. That's why you cannot land or in some cases that the airlines are not allowed to fly over a certain country or cannot land on a certain country. Now, as for the eighth freedom, let's go to the complex part. Now, the right to carry passengers from one point in the territory of the country for a while. So, the right to carry passengers from one point in the territory of country B and to another point within the same country on a flight that originated in the airline's home country. This freedom is known as the cabotage. So, ito yung maraming connecting flights within ano lang, within, let's say, within the country. Yes, Scotia?
Sir, ito po ba yung parang sa States po?
Exactly. Actually, it's also exercise here in the Philippines. So, in some flights kasi ng ano, I think it's ano ata, it's in Cebu Pacific. I'm not very familiar with the flights, but I think there is a flight dun sa ano, sa Cebu Pacific in which let's say Manila, pupunta siya ng Mindanao, Davao, and then pupunta siya sa ibang ano naman, sa ibang country na. Kumbaga dalawang beses siya magda-drop off sa hindi, from Luzon to Visayas to Mindanao and then to a different country. In some cases naman, for the United States naman, bilang it's a very large country, multiple jumps sila within the region of their within their country. So that's also called cabotage or the eighth freedom of the air. And last but not the least is the ninth freedom of the air, the right for an airline from a particular country to originate a flight in a foreign country and carry passengers from one point to another within the foreign country, also known as standalone cabotage. Ayan. So, ito yung, this is ano eh, this is quite rare yung ninth freedom of air in which for example sa Philippines mag-originate yung aircraft, lilipad siya sa let's say Los Angeles, California, and then lilipad siya um, papuntang New York, let's say New York. Ayan. Ito is isang airline lang to ha. That's why there are connecting flights class. That's why for example, once you reach Los Angeles, California, you'd be connected to a different airline na. So that kasi not all countries will be exercising the ninth freedom. There are again as mentioned earlier, there are certain countries that restricts freedoms of air. They will not provide all the nine freedoms. Ayan. So that actually ends our presentation. Any questions so far from our session? Yes, Scotia?
Sir, pwede po kayong magbigay na example for the ninth freedom of air po? Like,
Sure. Yung sa ninth freedom of air, let's go back here. So, from home country. So, home country, si Pal. Ito. Let's say Pal siya. From Manila. Oops. Manila. MNL. And Manila, going to... Ba't nawawala? MNL. Ayun. Going to, let's say, LAX. So, LAX is Los Angeles, California. That's the call sign for their yung airport nila, the major airport there, kung ano man yun. Kindly Google it, whatever that is. What's the name of the airport there in Los Angeles? Or LAX. And then, let's say, pupunta siya ng New York. So, that is the ninth freedom. So, tapos yung aircraft na yan is registered dito sa home country which is PAL, which is Manila, going to Los Angeles. And then, titigil siya doon. Pwede siya mag-pick up ng traffic or pwede siya mag-pick up ng passenger and cargo. And then, lilipad naman siya papuntang New York. Kasi 'di ba, we usually don't find that flight dito sa sa atin. Usually diretso lang lagi siya. Laging direct flight siya. In some cases naman class, ito kasi yung sa amin kasi kapag nasa US is what happened is that from US kasi I have parents in the US and my sister is also living there. So let me just share this one to you class. So lilipad sila doon. Ang ano nila is EVA or tinatawag kasi alam natin Eva Air, 'di ba? It's actually EVA. So EVA lilipad sila mula doon to Japan. And then from Japan, hindi na EVA yung sakay nila. Ang magiging sakay na is ANA or ANNA. And then going to the Philippines. So that's a different freedom kasi you're hindi siya pwedeng diretso sa Philippines. Even though it's possible, the flight are actually possible yung direct flight lang. Pero 'di ba napapansin nyo, this is it comes with a cost class. For direct flights, it will always be much expensive because of yung mga taxes na binabayad ng airlines just to exercise yung mga freedom of air. Ayan. So, in the ninth freedom kasi, ito yung talagang napakalakas mo ng airline na from your origin of country, you go to a different country and you could fly over their country as well. Wherever you want to go there. So, grabing makapangyarihan naman yun. So, that's why not all countries will agree to that type of freedom of air. So, did I answer your initial question, Mrs. Kosha?
Yes po, sir. Thank you po.
Ayan. Any other question? Ay, may nasulat pa doon. Any question, class? Sa tatandaan nyo, basta direct flight. If it's a direct flight, it's expensive. But if it's a connecting flight, especially if it's a different airline, it's usually cheaper. It's very cheap. Compared to a direct flight from Manila to wherever you want to go or wherever you want to go, it's definitely gonna be much more expensive. And so hopefully I've been able to answer all the queries. And let me just get